Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a pretty good show for you tonight. We have a number of videos from the Seattle Hemp Fest in 2019. We have a video on that. We have Jorge Cervantes with giant plants. Everyone loves to see those. We have a CNN video I'll be talking about from 2009, plus some music videos that we'll be running in opening and closing the show. We also, as usual, have our hemp news segment. So we have a lot of interesting news tonight, and we'll be taking your phone calls after that. So stand by as we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight is from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. More than 6 in 10 adults say they favor changing federal law to legalize marijuana for recreational use, according to national polling data compiled by the Washington, D.C.-based publication Politico and Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health. It's the third national survey released within the past month showing strong majority support among Americans for legalizing marijuana. 62% of the respondents endorsed legalization, and 69% said that they supported allowing cannabis to be sold at state licensed retail stores. Support for legalization was strongest among self-identified independents at 69% and Democrats at 67%. Slight majorities also said that they supported the establishment of state-licensed cannabis cafes at 52% and were comfortable with recreational marijuana facilities operating in their local communities and neighborhoods with 53%. Consistent with prior polls, most respondents residing in adult-use legal states favor the policy change. 64% said that legalizing marijuana for recreational use has been a good thing, end quote. At a time when the political divide is larger than ever, the issue of marijuana legalization is one of the few policy issues upon which most Americans agree. With 11 states now having legalized the adult use of cannabis, citizens of all ages and ideologies are seeing the benefits of regulation and rejecting the failed policy of marijuana prohibition. We expect to see public support continue to grow in 2020 as more and more states implement sensible cannabis regulatory policies. This poll from Politico and Harvard possesses a margin of error of 3.4%, plus or minus. A representative for the United States Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, for the first time today identified vitamin E acetate as a, quote, very strong culprit of concern, end quote, in the e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. Their announcement comes after health officials found the oil in the lungs of 29 patients sickened following their use of portable e-liquid vaporizers. Writing in the agency's journal, Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, the CDC investigators concluded, quote, based on these data from 29 patients, it appears that vitamin E acetate is associated with e-vapor and lung injuries. Ann Schuett, Principal Deputy Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, added, quote, these findings provide direct evidence of vitamin E acetate at the primary site of injury within the lungs, end quote. In early September, health officials in New York State and in Utah publicly acknowledged finding high levels of vitamin E oil in products suspected of being linked to the lung illness, which has been associated with over 2,000 cases nationwide and 39 fatalities. Online publications have issued several extensive reports regarding the popularity of vitamin E among illicit market vendors of e-liquid products. The reporting indicates that beginning in late 2018, about a year ago, some vendors began to use the oil as an additive in an effort to make the product flow better. You know, a lot of the reports have said it thickens the consistency. It actually thins the consistency. So there are misreports out there saying that this vitamin E acetate thickens THC, and it does just the opposite. It thins it out and makes it where it will flow. But it thins the consistency of the e-liquids to mass dilution. Other analyses have suggested that at least some lung-related injury may be of the result of the presence of specific metal binding agent in certain types of portable cartridges. Today's CDC advisory does not rule out the possibility that other possible agents may also be playing a role in the illness, but affirms, quote, "This is the first time that we've detected a potential chemical of concern in biological samples from patients with these lung injuries," end quote. The CDC further adds, quote, "The latest national and state findings suggest products containing THC, particularly the informal sources like friends or family or in-person or online dealers, are linked to most of the cases and play a major role in the outbreak." The full text of the CDC's November 8th advisory and the full text of the MMWR report is online at cdc.gov. Also out of Washington, D.C., survey data compiled by the Grocery Manufacturers Association finds that most Americans falsely believe that CBD-infused products sold commercially are regulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. According to a national sampling of 2,056 U.S. adults, 76% of the respondents presume that commercially available CBD products are FDA regulated. Another 16% of respondents said they did not know whether they were or were not. In fact, the FDA does not currently provide any regulatory oversight specific to the production or sale of commercially available CBD-infused products. As a result, third-party lab testing has frequently revealed inconsistencies between the percentage of CBD advertised and the amount actually contained in these products. In many instances, the actual quantities of CBD in the product are far lower than advertised. In other cases, testing has revealed the presence of THC. Some commercial products have also been identified to possess elevated levels of heavy metals and solvents, as well as psychoactive synthetic adulterants. By contrast, CBD-infused products sold at state licensed dispensaries are typically subject to state-specific regulations and lab testing protocols. However, such facilities are typically only open to either state-qualified patients or to adults in states that legally regulate cannabis sales. The Grocery Manufacturers Association survey also reported that just over a third of U.S. adults, or 34%, acknowledge having purchased a CBD-specific product. Among those familiar with CBD, over 55% say they've purchased it. The president and CEO of the Grocery Manufacturers Association recently wrote, quote, "The FDA has pledged to give consumers the information they need to make smart choices about CBD products, but estimates that it could take up to 5 years to establish federal CBD regulations. That timeline is unacceptable for a booming market. Effective, uniform regulation will only inform consumers. It will allow America's most trusted brands into the CBD market if they so choose, creating another layer of consumer confidence," end quote. Out of Nashville, Tennessee, the use of the term cannabis instead of marijuana does not influence the public's perception of the plant or their attitudes, according to data published in the journal PLOS One. Researchers affiliated with Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, surveyed a nationally representative sampling of adults regarding the term marijuana or cannabis. Specifically, authors examined whether framing the substance as marijuana as opposed to cannabis shapes public attitudes across a range of related topics, from support of legalization of cannabis, moral acceptance of its use, tolerance of activities involving cannabis, perceptions of the drug's harm, and stereotypes of its users. The investigators reported, quote, "We find no support for the notion that changing the name of the drug from marijuana to cannabis affects public opinion on the drug or policies governing it." Whether asked about legalization of the drug, the moral acceptability of its use, tolerance for activities involving the drug, the harmfulness of its use, or the traits of its users, and whether they are prompted to think about medical use or use more generally, respondents offered similar opinions whether we call the drug marijuana or cannabis. By contrast, the authors did report that the general public possesses more favorable opinions of the substance, quote, when told it is for medical versus unspecified purposes, end quote. That distinction is evident in national polls, which showed greater public support for medicalization of cannabis at 93%, according to Quinnipiac 2019 polls, over adult use legalization, which is at 66%, according to the Gallup polling agency. Changing the hearts and minds of the public with regards to marijuana has always been about substance, not terminology. Reformers are winning the legalization debate on the strength of our core arguments, namely the fact that legalization and regulation are better for public health and safety than is criminalization, and not because of any particular change in the lexicon surrounding the cannabis plant. Our next story tonight is from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Those suffering from chronic pain report significant improvements in health following the passage of medical cannabis access laws, according to data published in the journal Forum for Health, Economics, and Policy. Researchers affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania and the Perelman School of Medicine assessed the impact of medical cannabis legalization laws on self-reported health outcomes. The investigators reported that pain patients were the group most likely to report health benefits following medical cannabis enactment. They determined, quote, a medical marijuana law and protected dispensaries positively affect the health of individuals suffering from chronic pain by reducing the days not in good physical health, days not in good mental health, and days with health-related limitations. These effects translate into reduction in the number of days when health-related issues between 14 and 23%, end quote. The authors concluded, quote, individuals who report having pain that limits their daily activities see large health improvements. This is the strongest evidence that a group with a high probability of pain medication use sees large benefits from medical marijuana laws, end quote. There are a lot of different reports that pain patients reduce their use of opioids following access to medical cannabis therapy. Among state-licensed medical cannabis registrants, 2 out of 3 report consuming cannabis to mitigate pain conditions. This study, The Impact of Medical Marijuana Laws in Dispensaries on Self-Reported Health, appears in the Forum for Economic Health and Policy. Our next story is from Phoenix, Arizona. The use of either cannabis or cannabis-related products is associated with subjective benefits in women with endometriosis, according to data published in the Journal of Minimally Invasive Oncology Investigators, affiliated with St. Joseph's Hospital and Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona. They surveyed the attitudes of 364 patients with endometriosis. The authors reported, quote, use of medical marijuana and CBD amongst women with endometriosis is common. Both marijuana and CBD are reported as moderately or very effective for pelvic pain by the majority of women who have tried them, with marijuana reported as more effective than CBD, end quote. Separate survey data published in January in the journal BMC Complementary and Alternative Medicine reported that the use of cannabis was most effective self-management strategy engaged in by endometriosis patients. A 2017 review paper on the subject of cannabinoids and endometriosis concluded, quote, pain management for patients with endometriosis needs to be more effective, target the hormonal and immunological environment, downregulate proliferation while enhancing apoptosis, and normalize the invasive mechanisms and neuroangiogenesis process. The endocannabinoid system modulation appears to be a good therapeutic strategy by potentially combining all these factors, end quote. The full text of this study, self-reported efficacy of cannabis for endometriosis pain, appears in the Journal of Minimally Invasive Oncology. Out of Topeka, Kansas, members of a specific legislative committee are supporting recommendations to provide limited medical cannabis access to qualifying patients. Members of the Special Committee on Federal and State Affairs have called for the approval of legislation in 2020 permitting patient access to non-herbal forms of cannabis, such as edibles and topical products. They also recommended providing out-of-state patients with legal protections if they travel to Kansas with medical cannabis. We oppose prohibitions on herbal cannabis formulations and inhaling the product. Legislation enacted earlier this year in Kansas permits patients with debilitating medical conditions to possess oils containing extracts of CBD and only trace percentages of THC. The law provides no regulated system for the production or distribution of high CBD oil products. Despite the committee's recommendations, representatives from Kansas's law enforcement organizations indicate that they will continue to oppose any further medical cannabis access efforts. I don't know why law enforcement gets to decide medicine. It's just a mistake. You know, they have an economic incentive to steal people's property. And so law enforcement should not be in the business of criminalizing marijuana. It's just in their own economic interest when they are. Our next story is from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Justices of the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court have halted a countywide policy barring the use of medical cannabis to patients who are on probation unless it decides the issue next year. Members of the American Civil Liberties Union of Pennsylvania filed a class action suit challenging the local ban, calling the policy, quote, needlessly cruel and in violation of the state law, end quote. The ACLU legal director in Pennsylvania said, quote, the Supreme Court's action was the right thing to do. We look forward to explaining to the court why policies like this one are illegal and must be struck down, end quote. Courts in states have issued mixed opinions regarding whether those under court-ordered supervision may still access medical cannabis. Out of Brazil, plant-derived cannabinoids, including CBD, possess a potential multi-targeted treatment strategy for patients with Parkinson's disease and dyskinesia, according to a literature review published in the journal Neurotoxicity Research. Brazilian researchers affiliated with the University of Sao Paulo assessed clinical and preclinical evidence suggesting CBD and other cannabinoids have therapeutic effect in Parkinson's disease and dyskinesia, involuntary muscle movements. They concluded, quote, the studies reviewed here indicate that cannabinoids could influence the development and manifestation of Parkinson's disease and through L-DOPA-induced dyskinesia. Several mechanisms ranging from direct changes in critical neurotransmitters such as dopamine and glutamate to indirect anti-inflammatory effects seem to be involved. Among the cannabinoids investigated so far, CBD appears as one of the most promising drugs in preclinical trials. It's a multi-targeted compound with extensive range of biological effects in different neuropsychiatric disorders. The specific role of this compound in treatment of these disorders, however, remains to be established by large and comparative clinical trials, end quote. This study, cannabidiol and cannabinoid compounds as potential strategies for treating Parkinson's disease and L-DOPA-induced dyskinesia, appears in Neurotoxicity Research. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. We have a music video we're going to play now. This is a compilation put together by the Seattle Hemp Fest a couple months ago. It's Vivian McPeak and his old band Stickerbush's song, Take Back the Plant. We'll be right back.
plant.
Adult possession is legal.
Seattle Hemp Fest. And so we do not have another guest tonight. It's just me, and I've got a lot of videos to play. So we'll be running those shortly. If you have any questions that you want to ask us, tonight's a good night to call in. You can call us at 503-288-4442. That's 503-288-4442. We had a lot of interesting news tonight. We had covered the vitamin E acetate causing the vape illness and the lung problems and the fatalities previously when the news came out about September, first from Utah and then from New York State, saying that all of the patients who passed away from the vaping lung illness, lung injury, all had vitamin E acetate and suffered from a vitamin E-induced pneumonia that basically caused a buildup of fluid in their lungs, and they passed away. So now the CDC agrees. We're happy to see that. So we have some videos we're going to run. I'm not sure which one we have queued up right now, but let's go ahead and run one of those, and we'll be back. If you have some questions or comments, call us at that number on your screen.
So I want to talk to everybody today about a couple things. The big things I want to talk to people today about are prison, incarceration, compassion, and making this a better place for us, not only here in Oregon, where it's really, 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 really wonderful, and I hope you all realize that. Right now, I've got enough marijuana in my pocket to send me to prison for the rest of my life in certain places in the United States, okay? So I want you to understand that. You're living in a place right now where marijuana is very, very legal. There's a lot of people in this country who don't have that. They don't have that ability. And so what I want to talk about today, and one of the people I really want to talk about, is Bernard Noble. Does anybody here know who Bernard Noble is? Raise your hand if you know who Bernard Noble is. I got you, Russ. I got my team over here. I got Raphael over here. I got anybody else. Anybody else here who's done 5+ years in prison? Anybody? You back there. Come up for a minute. I want you to come up. It's important. And you don't have to, I'm not going to say anything about you specifically, but I want people to understand something here. We've got this man here who's done over 5 years in prison. Understand that. Bernard Noble, Louisiana, 13-year minimum mandatory sentence. Can anybody tell me how much marijuana Mr. Noble had on him when he was sentenced to 13 years in prison for a mandatory minimum? Miss Johnson, come up here. That much marijuana. This sent a man to prison for 13 goddamn years, okay? A lot of lawyers worked really hard. A lot of people worked really hard. A lot of advocates worked really hard. Can anyone tell me how much time Mr. Noble actually served? 7 years. 7 goddamn years in prison for an amount of marijuana. Can you hold that up for me, Ms. Johnson? That amount of marijuana sent a man to prison for 7 years in this country right now, okay? That's what we're living with in America. This bottle right here, this is 30 years to life in Mississippi. This is what stops people's seizures. This is what stops people from being in chronic pain all day. This is what stops people from hurting every day of their life. And for some of us out there, it just makes us feel good after work so we don't have to drink 3 shots of whiskey. Okay? So, I want to be really clear. We live in an amazing place in Oregon. Any one of you who's 21 years of age or older, or 18 and older and a medical patient can walk into a store and buy this. This was given to me today by someone who has the right to make it because Oregon has home grow. We have the right to grow your own medicine or recreation as you see fit, and we fought really hard for that privilege. Not every state has that. Every state will have that. That will happen. That day will come back. Because that day was not that long ago. We will end marijuana prohibition entirely in this country. One day at a time, one person at a time, one prisoner at a time. I want you to understand, though. I want you, everyone in here, to think for a moment. This gentleman spent 5+ years in prison, okay? What I want right now from everyone here is something really simple, and it's silence. I want everyone here to take 30 seconds And I want you to think about what it would be like to spend the next 5 years of your life in prison for the amount of marijuana that I'm holding in my hand. Okay? I'm going to time it. I'm going to shut up. It's really rare that I shut up. So starting now, 30 seconds of silence. You just did 30 seconds. The man who just walked off the stage did 5 years. Bernard Noble did 7 years, 4 months and a couple days. And he's on parole. He's still getting drug tested every month. He's still in the position that if he screws up in the slightest, if he so much as runs a red light, that man's back in prison over 2 grams of marijuana. So I want everyone here today to think about what it would be like to spend that amount of time in a metal cage over a plant, because that's what we're still dealing with in America. Every single one of you here today has the right to walk around as long as you're an adult with an ounce of marijuana in your pocket, and no one gets to say much else to you. And that's a wonderful privilege that we live in such a place, but it's not finished. Just because it's done here doesn't mean it's done everywhere else. I don't know if you noticed or not, but my accent ain't from here. I'm originally from North Carolina. My family members died in prison, okay? I had friends and family who were in cages. They went there for years and years and years for an amount of marijuana that honestly people in stores here throw on a counter and can sell to you. I want you to understand that we have it really, really good. We have it amazing in Oregon. We have a system here that rivals any in the U.S. Are we going to make it better? Yes. There are problems with it. Everyone here knows, if you're involved in this fight, that it's not perfect. But what I want you to understand is that when people come here from Mississippi, when they come here from Louisiana, when they come here from Idaho, when they come here from the South, when they come here from other countries where marijuana is the death penalty, they come to a place that allows them freedom, that allows the compassion, and allows us to live in a better world because we get to share with those people. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you, okay? I'm going to do one last thing, and I do it every year. I have to do it, and it is this. This is my lighter. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's my business card. It's what I give out to people. It's my way of making the world a better place because it's free legal advice that'll keep you out of 99% of your problems. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through it. It says one simple thing. Am I free to go, officer? If I am being detained, I do not consent to any searches, and I want to speak with my attorney prior to answering any questions. Once again, am I free to go, officer? If I am being detained, I do not consent to any searches, and I want to speak with my attorney prior to answering any questions. I can't fix every single one of your problems, but what I can do with this is keep the cops out of your life, out of your car, out of your home, out of your lives, out of your children's lives, and make the world a better fucking place.
So that is Mr. John Lucy, a good friend of us in our show here, and he gave a very inspirational talk there. I decided we should run that again here tonight. And we do have the next video that we're going to play is actually from just over 10 years ago. It is from CNN back in 2009. Back in 2009, I was contacted by the folks at CNN to appear on one of their episodes about marijuana and marijuana's effects. And so they did a special on Anderson Cooper's show 360. So a fellow named Joe Johns, who's one of the reporters on that show, he flew out here from Atlanta, and I told him that I really wanted to debate Sanjay Gupta because this was in May of 2009. Just several months prior to that, about 4 months before that, Sanjay Gupta had written an article, an editorial in Time magazine called Why I Will Vote No on Medical Marijuana. And it was all about why medical marijuana doesn't work. And so I knew Gupta was wrong, and I told Joe Johns I really wanted to debate him because he's wrong. He goes, well, why do you think he's wrong? I said, because I have thousands of medical journal articles that talk about how medical marijuana works for everything from cancer and migraines to gastrointestinal ailments and neurodegenerative diseases and cancer. I said that. But anyway, so I gave those to Joe Johns in an email, links to all these different articles. And I didn't get to debate Gupta directly, but I did change his mind. He came on immediately after me, as you'll see in this clip from 10 years ago on CNN, and changed his tune. He said medical marijuana does in fact work. And just last month, Gupta had his 5th CNN hour-long special called Weed. He's had 5 hours of broadcastings over the past few years talking about how medical marijuana does actually work and how he is now gone from an opponent of ours in that Time magazine editorial in January 2009 to now being one of our best medical advocates on an international stage as the medical spokesperson for CNN. So here is this film clip from back in June 2009. We'll be back right after that.
Should marijuana be legal? That's the question at the center of our week-long special, America's High, the case for and against pot. We've interviewed Melissa Etheridge, who said she used medical marijuana after her diagnosis of breast cancer. We've also taken you on a raid at a national forest where Mexican drug cartels are planting marijuana gardens. As the battle rages, marijuana keeps entering this country. This week, Border Patrol agents in California found nearly 200 pounds of pot hidden in 2 vehicles. These pictures from that seizure. Arrests were made in both instances. There are places right here in America, though, where it's perfectly okay to own and smoke pot. And tonight, you're going to meet a legal pusher of the drug who believes it can help sick people. Joe Johns reports.
If marijuana has a future as a legitimate business in this country, Paul Stanford of Portland is a true pot pioneer.
I feel a little bit more relaxed. I can feel that I've had a couple of little puffs here.
Call it his Oregon Trail. For 25 years, he's pushed to legalize marijuana. In fact, for the last decade, he's hosted a cable access show on it.
Bring out our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
He founded what he says was the first medical marijuana consultation and referral service in Oregon. The company has amassed files on 64,000 patients in 8 states where medical marijuana is legal, matching people who want it to doctors who can provide it. Stanford says it's a $3 million a year business. These plants are also Stanford's. He's licensed by the state to grow them for medical marijuana. He gives it away in closed-door meetings like this. The next frontier for this pioneer?
We need to take this market out of the hands of the kids and substance abusers who control it today and put it in the hands of the state, where the age limit's strictly enforced and where we can get tax revenue.
He's trying to get an initiative on the ballot here in Oregon that would allow for state taxation and regulation of marijuana, but he's failed in past efforts to legalize it here.
It doesn't cost much to raise these plants. The whole operation runs on a shoestring, basically. But if this were scaled out so that marijuana was being sold all over the country and it were legalized, there are some people who say the cost to society would be much greater than the benefit.
It's a guessing game, but a moderate estimate says if marijuana were decriminalized, it would save about $13 billion from not having to enforce marijuana laws. And if pot were taxed like alcohol and cigarettes, it would mean about $7 billion, a net gain for government of $20 billion.
But that's not a complete picture. Comparing alcohol to pot, one professor at USC said alcohol taxes only cover about 10% of alcohol-related costs like drunk driving. And tobacco taxes only cover about 20% of tobacco-related medical costs.
So what about marijuana? If legalized, would we see more accidents or lower worker productivity? And what about health effects, higher insurance rates? In Paul Stanford's garden, it's all blue sky.
That's assuming that marijuana is like alcohol and tobacco, and it isn't. Marijuana is a healthy alternative and much safer than alcohol and tobacco.
But what about the cartels and the brutal international drug trade? Those who support legalization say it will stem the violence. But critics say the cartels will simply slash their prices or ramp up trade in other drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine.
Stanford says there's no proof that would happen, and he remains confident in the mantra of legalization.
Marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol, has a lot of medicinal benefit, and so if we look at the science, we're going to win.
But given the national experience with legalized recreational drugs, who knows where this Oregon Trail will lead? Joe John, CNN, Portland.
Before the break, we introduced you to a man in Oregon, a pot pioneer of sorts, who believes that science shows marijuana has health benefits. Does it? One doctor we spoke to this week calls pot the best medication he's ever worked with. Others say it's a potent, addictive, gateway drug with dangerous side effects that ruins lives and families. Both sides have studies to prove their case. So what exactly are the facts? Let's try to get some answers. From 360 MD, Dr. Sanjay Gupta joins us now. Sanjay, let's get at it. Are there benefits to medical marijuana? I mean, is there a case for its use? Because the patients we talk to swear by it.
Yeah, well, the answer is yes. I mean, there are some medical benefits to marijuana, and this is more than just anecdotal evidence now, Anderson. There are some studies to sort of back that up. We know that there are receptors in the brain, cannabinoid receptors, and they control things like your pain levels, your hunger levels, things related to your mood. And therein lies some of the possible benefits medically of marijuana. For example, someone who's having terrible malnourishment or terrible nausea as a result of chemotherapy or being infected with HIV/AIDS, using marijuana could stimulate appetite. Neuropathic pain, Anderson, something I deal with quite a bit as a neurosurgeon. It's that lancinating nerve pain that is often caused by trauma or some sort of injury or surgery. Sometimes it can be very refractory to pain medications. Marijuana can help there as well. Multiple sclerosis, something else that I treat, that's something that causes significant tremors, for example. Marijuana can help. But the caveat, Anderson, is that sometimes other medications, which we know more about, may be better alternatives. So it can help, but there might be other things that even better.
Is there medical evidence that it can be dangerous? I mean, what do doctors say?
Well, most of the studies on this really look at some of the shorter-term effects of marijuana. It is hard to make the statement right now about the longer-term dangers of marijuana. The medical community as a whole, for example, the American Medical Association, is against the smoking of marijuana. I mean, that is a stance that they take as an organized medical association. But there are several areas in the brain, again, that marijuana affects. The hippocampus, Anderson, is an area that's responsible for memory. So short-term memory problems is something that is often cited. Also, the developing brain. Does it have somehow a greater impact on the developing brain? There are studies on this, although as I look through them today, even not conclusive. It's a real concern. There's also
Okay, there's Sanjay Gupta. He was changing his tune. Just a few months before that, he had written an editorial in Time magazine saying that why I will vote no on medical marijuana. And I am happy to righteously say that I flipped him from the dark side to the good. And he's now one of our biggest proponents of medical cannabis. I'm going to do a little showing. Well, actually, no, we have a caller who's standing by. Let's go ahead and take that call. Welcome to the show, caller.
Hey, a great show tonight. This is Judy. I'm sorry that we couldn't be there.
Hey, Judy, that's okay. How are you?
I'm good. I called in to tell everybody about the Oregon Cannabis Commission meeting this week. Excuse me.
Oh, okay.
But listening to Sanjay Gupta, I always love the way they frame things. Even though he's on board with us now, it's
he was just starting to change then. He had been, he'd written that editorial, so he was really just completely changing his public stance right there on the air. And as he said, there are a lot of studies to prove it. I gave him 5,000 medical journal studies for him to peruse before this show, and that was enough to change him.
We all thank you very much, because even though I don't watch CNN and don't care for it, it's important that many people would be hearing him talk about it. Although what I was thinking about was how he framed it. Because we don't have the long-term studies to know the dangers. Not that we don't have the long-term studies to know the benefits.
Right.
but
you got to realize when that was back in 2009. The world has changed a lot since then, Yeah. But tell us about the Oregon Cannabis Commission. So you went to one of their meetings here this week?
So we have another live meeting here in Portland. It's not a call-in meeting. It's a live meeting. It's at their usual location. It's this Tuesday, the 12th, from 1 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon at the Portland State Office Building, which is in the Lloyd District, of course, at 800 Northeast Oregon Street. And it's on the main floor in room 1B.
All right.
I've got the email in front of me. They don't have the agenda up for it yet, but gosh knows there's plenty to talk
So it
about.
starts at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, 1 to 4, and they always take comments at the end of the meeting, and they don't say, you got 3 minutes, make it fast.
Ah, okay.
They want people to come.
Unlike
and
the OLCC and state
exactly. It's the exact opposite. They are so welcoming. And Dr. Rachel Knox, who is, again, voted the chairperson of the committee, was just on the show with her dad, Dr. David Knox, a couple of months ago, and talking about people, come on out to the OCC meeting. We want to hear from you. We need to hear from you. The more
I wish I could make it, but I have 2 gigs in Mexico City this week. And early in the morning, I'm off to Mexico City to do the World Trade Center's Weed Trade Show. It's going on today, tomorrow, and Sunday. I'll be there on Sunday. And then I've got an event in Guadalajara. So for the next 2 weeks, we will not have a live show. I'll be in Guadalajara next showtime, and in Medellin, Colombia, the show after that. But we should be back live on the day after Thanksgiving here, which I believe is the 29th of November.
That's awesome. I hope you have a great trip, and it's always wonderful to see you out there. I also, if you've got a second, just wanted to mention that OCC is also recruiting for 3 different subcommittees, and that's on their website too. Yeah, so people want to take a look at that. Anyway, look forward to seeing people there. Thank you.
All right, you have a good one there, Judy. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, sure. Bye-bye.
We have a little show and tell here. We're going to go down. This is hempcrete. It's made with marijuana stems and powdered limestone or quicklime. This is hemp twine. The day after Thanksgiving, this will be the wick on this little number. We pour hemp oil. This is hemp oil. Hemp seed oil, not flower oil. And so you just pour it right in here, put in the hemp wick, and you can see it lights up, and it's the oldest illuminant before whale oil. Right here we have some cannabis pills. These are from Park Davis. You can see a Park Davis still in existence today. This still has several actual pills in it. You can hear them shaking around in there. Here are 2 different powdered hashish containers. This one is empty, and it is also from Park Davis. There's Park Davis's label, and here's another one also from Park Davis. Park Davis had about 20 different medical cannabis concoctions. Here is another cannabis product from, what is it? It's Upjohn. Upjohn, another still in existence medical producer. Then right next to it, we have a product from couple of products from Eli Lilly. You can see that this is cannabis indica, and then next to it is a much larger bottle of tincture of cannabis, number 17. Eli Lilly also had about 20 different cannabis products up until the 1930s when it was made illegal. Right next to it we have a cough balsam. This is approximately 1890. It's still sealed and still full of its original contents here. Then right next to it we have a corn medicine, sea berries. This is a predecessor of Johnson & Johnson's. Sea berries became Seaberry & Johnson, and then Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson and its predecessors had a number of corn medicines and topical medicines. Then right next to this, we have this tin. It is unopened. Maybe pan out just a little bit so we can see this is an unopened tin. It has 300 marijuana cigarettes inside from the United States government, and it was shipped to Elvie Masica. Here is another label. It says it was provided to her as medicine or maybe close in on that one. Provided to her as medicine in 2016, but it was made into cigarettes in 2009, January of 2009, so it must have been harvested before that. So by the time she got it, it was already 8 years old. But this is an unopened tin of 300 government pre-rolled cigarettes from the Research Triangle Institute and the University of Mississippi's Government Marijuana Forum. This actually belongs to the Ohio Cannabis Museum, and I am just holding on to it in the interim. But that's the end of our show and tell for tonight. We're going to wind up with another video from Jorge Cervantes. Jorge is talking about huge cannabis trees. We'll be back right after this.
Well, here we are in this really cool garden in southern Oregon. And it's October 3rd today, 2016. We were in this garden a bit earlier in the year, and the plants were huge, but now they're giant. These things are honking huge. Look at the size of this thing. See, this thing is huge. I mean, it's huge, huge. Buds everywhere, and these are still a little bit small, but they're gonna get bigger. And they're gonna start harvest over on the other side. There's 58 plants here, only 58. And I'll tell you, I'm just guessing myself, I'm guessing that the medium size or median harvest on this of just dry flower tops is going to average somewhere between 10 and 12, 14 pounds. And that means you're going to have some 15 pounders here. Not this plant, this one's kind of a weird one. See, it's got this step in the middle. What was this, a Blue Dream cross with Tahoe? And there's another one right behind it, and it's real similar. I don't know. It's really funny. I brought my friend Will Feedham, who's the vice president of the Oregon Sun-Grown Growers Guild. And we're going to do a little bit of comparison and things, the differences between your garden and the one here. Absolutely. This is great. I remember the soil at your place had great big cracks in it. It's full of clay and everything, and it's kind of boggy there too. It's really heavy soil.
Absolutely.
And this is like perfect river bottom here. I mean, this is like the best soil. I mean, and they keep it, it's totally organic and it looks great. Such a big difference, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you see these plants are planted directly into the ground, whereas my plants were sitting about a foot above the ground in potting soil. And that's part of the reason why these plants are so much bigger and healthier. They're just
they're not restricted.
They
have that deep taproot that goes way down.
Yeah.
And you know, they were given these plants when they were big like that. So they've already cut the water right now. They're not going to water anymore until until next year, really. But they were giving them, what, 100 gallons on Wednesday, and on Saturday another 50 gallons, so 150 gallons a week.
Right.
That's quite a bit of water, you know, every week. Man, these things really suck it up. But if they don't get enough water, they don't grow right.
Yeah, that's true. And if you compare the acre feet of water usage on even a really healthy and big cannabis crop like this to something like alfalfa, this is actually a very low water crop.
Right. Alfalfa just sucks the water.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that's really important. You know, even cannabis is even a lower water use than grapes. So that's
grapes are pretty high too. I mean,
yeah.
And where I live, the grapes are everywhere, and those guys get all the water.
Right.
You know, they have to wash the bottle. They have to do all these other value-added things. And then when we talk about alfalfa, you can buy a bale of alfalfa hay over in Sonoma for what I think $18 a bale.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder how much water it takes to make that bale of hay, and how much water it takes to make this. You could make a half a dozen of these plants with the same. Grow the half a dozen of these plants with the same amount of water as it took to make that one bale or 1.5 bales.
Exactly. And that's a really important factor when we're talking about how we're going to integrate cannabis into the economy and have it be, you know, a sustainable crop that we can really model other crops after.
That's so true, so true. Let's look at the way they apply this water too. Let's see. We've got, well, here's an irrigation hose. They come out. We've got feeder lines that are over there. We can see these feeder lines. And then here's our drip emitters here. And notice they keep them underneath this this mulch that keeps everything a bit cooler, and it keeps the UV light off of these so they don't break up in the sun. afterwards, and they've got this really nice straw mulch, and it's organic mulch.
Exactly.
And it doesn't have all those seeds in it.
Right. Yeah, we saw at the garden we were at before that we had used wheat straw, which was full of seed. This rice straw, the seed doesn't like to germinate in this sort of drier environment at the surface here. So
even if there were seeds, they wouldn't be able to germinate well.
Right.
And they may germ, but they would just die real soon because it's not a wet enough environment.
Right.
So that's pretty interesting. And notice they bring this all the way out. This is the drip line where the roots normally stop, but since these are really big, strong, healthy plants, the roots will go way out here, and they water this part by hand. They water this by hand, which, well, it needs it. It needs it. Anything else you can think about right here?
Well, we saw before last time we were at the garden that they were just putting up the outer layer of cages.
Right.
And it's interesting to go back and if you compare where the video is now, how necessary that is as these colas start to add weight out at the end of these long branches.
Well, yeah, it's so true, huh? And the thing is, we've got the heavy wire here that's very rigid, and now we've got this plastic netting here that holds the buds. So, because see, if this weren't here, the buds would fall when they get really, really warm. In southern Oregon here, it's been raining for the last 4 days, and nobody even shakes their buds off or anything. They just wait for the wind to come through and shake it off. It's pretty amazing. And then we also saw on the previous video how the trellising, where they trellis these plants straight out. That's how come they're so wide like this. Yeah, they're really wide, and I just can't believe it. How darn big these are.
Yeah.
Well, let's go through and look at some of the varieties here.
Absolutely.
All of these plants are the names. There's just right here, Jack's Cleaner. This is this plant right here. Everything's got a nice stake on it. Notice a nice big big wooden stake like this. You're not gonna lose it because a lot of times these stakes get lost. That's a big thing. And I know you wanted to compare some of these plants with the ones that you're growing.
Absolutely.
Jesus, look at that one back there. I still can't believe how big that is. Look at the size of this thing. Jesus. I mean, I've seen fruit trees smaller than that. These things are just honking huge. But weren't there some over here? There was one here that died of root rot.
Right. I believe actually this was a spot.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So you can see how big of an area it takes just to grow one plant. I know people that their whole garden's that big. This is for one plant. Yeah. So but you had one that was in your garden.
Right. We had there's
it came from the same breeder.
So people often wonder, how do they grow those big trees like that? Well, they start them indoors in the middle of the winter. By the time they put them outdoors, they're already 5 feet, 6 feet tall. And so then they just grow from there. So that's the real secret to growing really huge plants. We are just about out of time. I want to thank you folks for watching. Again, we will not have a live show for the next 2 weeks. We're going to have pre-recorded shows on both the 15th and the 22nd, but we'll be back here the day after Thanksgiving on the 29th of, or the 15th, 22nd, then we're here live on the 29th of November and thereafter. So I want to thank you folks for watching. We're going to go out on a great tune by Mr. John Cornette, who wasn't feeling well enough to be here tonight, but we missed his music. So here's his song. Tune in for our recorded shows next week. And adios, amigos. I'm off to Mexico and Colombia. Help us restore hemp. Good night.
My medicine is cannabis. Woohoo! But I also call it Medaganja. Ganja. I like Medaganja. Ganja. I like to grow Medaganja. Stick it in the ground, water it down, Medaganja. Woohoo! Imagine that. Ganja. I want Metaganja. Ganja. I want to use Metaganja. For food and medicine, prohibition must end. Metaganja. Woohoo. Ganja. I like Metaganja. Ganja. I like to use Metaganja. Sometimes we get high. Yes, sometimes we do get high. Metaganja. Woo-hoo-hoo. There's nothing wrong with getting high, folks.